Hello viewers, welcome to my YouTube channel. Get ready for heart-touching stories. Don't forget to subscribe and let's begin.
The workshop smelled like her. That was the first thing I noticed when I finally unlocked the door 3 months after the funeral, 2 months after my sister stopped calling every day to check on me, and 6 weeks after I had promised myself I would be ready. The smell hit me before the light did. Sawdust and linseed oil and that particular brand of hand cream she ordered from a small company in Vermont. The one that came in a green tin and cost too much and she bought anyway because she said her hands were her livelihood. Margaret had been a furniture restorer. Not a hobbyist, not a weekend woodworker, but a genuine craftsperson who could look at a ruined Victorian sideboard and see, beneath the water damage and the bad paint jobs and the decades of neglect, the thing it had always been trying to be. People drove hours to bring her their inheritances. She had a 3-year waiting list. She had been 44 years old. The aneurysm had been, according to the neurologist who sat across from me in a room that smelled of antiseptic and other people's grief, entirely unpredictable. A word I have since come to hate. Unpredictable, as though what I needed from medical science was a weather report. I stood in the doorway of the workshop for a long time before I stepped inside. The town had been after me about the electrical panel almost immediately, not out of cruelty but practicality. Margaret's workshop was attached to the main house, and the wiring was old and the insurance company had flagged it during the claims process. A routine inspection had revealed that the subpanel in the workshop was original to the 1940s structure, a relic of fuses and aluminum wiring that had no business being connected to the modern tools she ran off it. The inspector had left a yellow notice. My brother-in-law had mentioned it gently twice. My neighbor, who was an electrician and who had known Margaret since they were in the same elementary school class, had offered 3 times to come look at it. His name was Dale Purcell, and I finally called him on a Tuesday morning when I had nothing left to distract myself with. He arrived with his toolbox in the careful, slightly formal manner that people adopt around the newly widowed, that performance of normalcy that is itself a kind of tenderness. He shook my hand too firmly. He said it was good to see me. He did not say she was in a better place, which I appreciated more than I could tell him. Need to work in the panel first, he said, setting his toolbox on her workbench without asking the way an old friend would. Then trace the circuits, might take most of the day. Whatever you need, I said, I'll be in the house, but I wasn't. I found myself drifting back to the workshop doorway every hour or so, standing there the way you stand in the doorway of a hospital room, not quite entering, not quite leaving. I watched Dale work with the quiet competence of someone who has done a thing so many times it has become a form of meditation. He hummed to himself occasionally. Old songs, the kind without words. It was around 2 in the afternoon when he called out to me. Hey Martin. Can you come in here a minute? I stepped inside fully for the first time. The workshop was exactly as she had left it. A half-restored escritoire sat on her main table, its veneer lifted along one edge. The repair paused mid-thought. Her tools hung on their pegboard outlines, each one in its place. Her notebook, she kept a running log of every piece she worked on, the history she'd researched, the techniques she planned to try, lay open on the small desk in the corner. I did not look at what page it was open to. Dale was standing near the back wall, beside the old wooden shelving unit she'd built to hold her finishing supplies. He had his flashlight pointed at the wall behind it. Need to pull this shelving out to get to the junction box behind it, he said, but I want to show you something first. He stepped aside so I could see where the flashlight was pointing. There, wedged between the back of the shelving unit and the wall, invisible unless you moved the shelves, was a box. It was wooden, maybe 18 inches long and a foot wide, with a fitted lid and a small brass latch. The wood was dark walnut, beautifully finished, and I could tell at a glance that Margaret had made it herself. She had a way of joining corners that was distinctive, a particular angle on the dovetails that I had watched her cut 100 times. I noticed it when I was checking the circuit runs, Dale said. Didn't want to move it without telling you. I reached for it instinctively. Wait, Dale said. I looked at him. He had a complicated expression on his face, not alarm exactly, but something close to it. Caution maybe, the look of a man who has stumbled into territory he didn't expect and isn't sure how to navigate. She told me about that box, he said. About 2 years ago. We ran into each other at the hardware store and we got to talking. You know how she was. I did know how she was. She could talk to anyone. She could draw out the interior life of a stranger in a checkout line. Just finished making it, he said. She seemed happy about it, but she also said, he paused, choosing his words. She said it wasn't a box to be opened alone. Those were her words. She was pretty specific about it. Said if anything ever happened and someone found it, they shouldn't open it by themselves. Workshop was very quiet. Did she say why? I asked. No, and I didn't ask. You know, you don't ask Margaret why about things. She'd just look at you. Almost laughed. That was exactly right. She had a way of receiving certain questions, the intrusive ones, the ones that were really demands dressed up in curiosity, that made you feel slightly foolish for having asked. Dale gave me the space I needed. He found something to occupy himself on the other side of the workshop, while I stood and looked at the box for a long time. I thought about the 3 months since the funeral. I thought about her notebook lying open on the desk, about the half-finished escritoire, about the green tin of hand cream I had found in the bathroom cabinet and put in my nightstand drawer because throwing it away felt like an act I wasn't ready to commit. I thought about all the things that end without warning, and all the things that people leave behind them, and how those things are sometimes intended and sometimes not, and how you can't always tell which is which until you open the box. I went inside and called my daughter. Nora was 22 and living in the city, working at an architecture firm where she made coffee and organized site visits and was, she insisted, learning an enormous amount. She had her mother's hands, long fingers, square nails, a certain deliberateness in the way she used them. She had also inherited Margaret's talent for repair, though she didn't know it yet. I found something, I said. The workshop, I think you should come. She arrived the next morning, Saturday, before Dale returned. She stood in the workshop doorway just as I had done, and I watched her go through the same sequence of adjustments: the smell, the stillness, the weight of ordinary objects that have become extraordinary through loss. We moved the shelving unit together. I carried the box to Margaret's main work table, to the cleared space beside the escritoire. Nora touched the dovetail joints without my saying anything about them. Mom made this, she said. Yes, we stood on either side of it. I told her what Dale had told me, the hardware store 2 years ago, not a box to be opened alone. Nora was quiet for a moment. She knew, Nora said, didn't she somehow? I didn't answer that because I didn't know how to answer it and I wasn't sure it mattered. What mattered was that she had made a thing and hidden it and told someone, just one person, chosen carefully, how it was supposed to be found. Nora lifted the brass latch. Inside, laid on a bed of folded green velvet, were three things. The first was a letter, handwritten on her good cream stationery. She had a particular handwriting, precise and slightly slanted, the lowercase g with a loop she developed in middle school and never abandoned. The letter was long, 5 pages, and it was addressed to both of us, Martin and Nora, and I will not transcribe it here because it was ours. But I will say that it was not a letter about dying. It was a letter about living, about particular memories she wanted to make sure we kept, about things she had observed in each of us that she wanted us to know she had seen, about her work and what it had meant to her, and what she hoped it might come to mean to Nora someday if Nora was interested. No pressure. There was no pressure. The second thing was a small envelope containing a USB drive. Nora plugged it into her laptop, and we found a folder containing Margaret's complete research notes for every piece she had ever restored: 4 decades of furniture history, provenance research, wood identification, technique documentation. Thousands of hours of work, organized with the same meticulous care she brought to everything. At the bottom of the folder was a single document labeled for whoever wants it. It contained instructions for applying to an apprenticeship at a restoration studio in Maine, along with a note from Margaret saying she had spoken to the owner, an old friend, and that a place would be held. She had planned this. In the middle of her life, in the middle of her work, she had looked ahead and made arrangements. The third thing was a small framed photograph I had never seen before. It was the two of us, very young. I couldn't have been more than 25, which meant we'd been together only a year or two. We were at a flea market somewhere, and I was holding up an absolutely ruined wooden chair with one leg missing and a seat like a sunken ship, and she was laughing at me because I apparently thought it was a good find. I remembered the chair vaguely. I did not remember the photograph being taken on the back of the frame in her handwriting, the man who saw potential in that chair. Good instincts. Nora and I sat in the workshop for a long time. We read the letter through twice. We looked at the photograph. Outside, a cardinal went at it in the oak tree by the fence, making its particular argument with the morning. When Dale came back to finish the wiring, I met him in the driveway and shook his hand for too long. Thank you, I said, for telling me. He nodded, a single brief movement of a man who understands that some things have been handled correctly and doesn't need to make a ceremony of it. She was a good person, Martin. Made arrangements, I said. Did you know she was? She had all of that ready. The drive, the letter, everything. Was always thinking 3 steps ahead, Dale said simply. On any piece she worked on, she always knew what came after, what came after, what came after. That was her gift. He went inside to finish the wiring. I stood in the morning light for a moment before following. The workshop had its electrical panel replaced by the end of the day. The inspector came the following week and cleared it. The yellow notice was removed from the door. Nora took the USB drive back to the city. She called me 6 weeks later to say she had written to the studio in Maine. 3 months after that, she flew up for a weekend visit and came back with calluses on her hands and a particular light in her eyes that I recognized from her mother. The box sits on the shelf in my study now, empty, lid open. I keep it that way on purpose. It has already done its work. What it held was not grief's property. It was the opposite of grief, was the insistence of a woman who loved us specifically and well, that we would need particular things at a particular time, and that she could still, even from the distance of her absence, make sure we had them. Don't open it alone. She knew what she was talking about. She usually did. The escritoire is still in the workshop, the veneer still lifted along one edge. I have not touched it. But I have started to look at it the way Margaret used to look at things, not at what it is, but at what it has always been trying to become. Maybe that's enough for now. Maybe that's where restoration begins, not with tools or technique but with the willingness to see.